So here we want to very quickly go through this topical discussion, legislation and standards, setting standards, legislating, just so that we have a framework that paves the way for inclusive innovation. I want to ask my colleagues, my panelists, to introduce themselves. I'm sure you will have gotten familiar with me. I'm K.I. Laibuta. I've been introduced by the MC. So we'll go straight to our colleagues to introduce themselves, beginning with my extreme left. Who is on my extreme left?
Yeah, so it's
Abdel?
me. Yeah, it's me.
Good.
So my name is Abdelmonem Sharkawi. I'm actually coming from Egypt. I'm the chairman of the National Academy of Information Technology for Persons with Disabilities. It's actually a center that's affiliated with the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology in Egypt. So, do you want
Thanks, Abdel. Yeah. Let's have the second panelist introduce themselves as well.
Yeah, it's you.
Thank you. My name is Senator Crystal Asige. I am representing persons with disabilities, women and youth in the Parliament of Kenya, and I am many other things, but for this discussion, we're here to talk about legislation, so yes, Asante.
Asante, at least I can introduce Shoaib, I can see him. Shoaib, say something about yourself.
Okay, thank you. My name is Shoaib Choklan. I'm the Executive Director of the African Disability Forum, which is a continental organization of persons with disabilities that is based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Good, great. So you're all welcome.
Dr. Laibuta?
Yes, there's somebody else?
Yeah, they forgot to announce me. My name is Christopher Patno. I lead accessibility and disability inclusion for Google for EMEA. Though I don't sound like it, I'm based in London, England.
Sorry about that, Chris. I think you're seated too far away. I couldn't see you.
I blend in nicely.
All right, so shall we begin with Abdel? Abdel, tell us a little about standard setting and legislation, innovation, and inclusivity, particularly in the context of your Egyptian region.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I guess I have a short presentation here. If you can put it up out there, please. I'm going to be brief, very brief, because of timing. I know everyone wants to go for lunch, right? So, get fast. So, can you get the presentation up, please? Is it there?
Just highlights.
Yeah.
Because of time.
All right. So, okay, here it's running, so let me get to the start. So this is a quick introduction. You see here, this is our building. It's actually in the Knowledge City. So let me briefly say that, I really liked the talk today. All talks were very useful, but in particular, because this touches with technology, Ambassador Philip actually touched on a lot of critical issues, particularly when it comes to integration and the scoping and sizing of the problem. So let me point to this very important report, which is the Global Report on Assistive Technology. And I first think this report was produced by the WHO and the UNICEF. This came in the second half of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And actually, there are quite good recommendations when it comes to that. So we want independence, to achieve independence, inclusion, and empowerment. So really, and this goes with the UN, but no one is left behind. So when we do that, we use assistive technology. There are 1 billion people who are in need of that. And this is a huge market, by the way. So there is also a financial aspect to that. But when we are doing assistive technologies, this needs to be regulated. So, and this is the aspect I'm going to talk from an engineering or a technical perspective. So why do we really need standards? Because we need to ensure functionality. We need to ensure safety. And this almost goes with every device that we use on a daily basis. Reliability and robustness is of an essence here. Compatibility and interoperability is also very important. Also, with all of these advancements that we're looking at, ethical applications of technology are of importance too. So maybe those standards will help to regulate those issues. In the beginning, or in the title of my presentation, I didn't just point to standards, I also pointed to best practices, because things and technology is moving really very fast. So standards and how we cope with things really need to move in an agile fashion as well. And also this will serve for accountability, which goes to the regulation part. And there are more knowledgeable people here about law more than me. But part of the most well-known standard, and I'm not going to talk about it in details here because there will be other sessions, but we're going to talk about it, is the Web Accessibility Guidelines and the universal design, so there will be specific sessions about that. But what about other things? So when we are saying digital accessibility or inclusion, this is not just about software here. We're really about talking about a lot of things. We are about talking about spatial inclusion, because now the digital things are coming there. We're talking about hardware advancements. We're talking about a lot of things. So if you see here, I'm playing just a short video. So we have seen this Apple Pro Vision, and before it was the Microsoft HoloLens. But the usability factor of things are very important. There are other companies that are really working on things. So this is example, for example, of an AR device that is going to be useful, and particularly for communication, people having communication disabilities, if you have texting and, all of these layers of technology. So you have all of these tools going around, whether machine learning, AI, you have IoT, you have all of these metaverse tools that are coming now into play. So all of these things needs to be a little bit more regulated.
Thanks, Abdel. We'll come back to you again, just so that we see.
So let me talk about this slide, just one brief. So when we're talking about standards here, or talking about these devices, we have to put into account also there are medical aspects of that, and there have been, there are part of these assistive technologies that can have medical implications. So we need to consider medical regulations. There are also content, and there are also loss of effort. So I'll just leave this slide, and we'll pause it for
Thank you, Abdel. And sorry to cut you short, but we now begin to see how innovation plays a critical role in our lives, and how standards help to enhance functionality, and to be sure that we are not just innovating for the sake of it. Chris, would you kindly just unwrap what this phrase really means for us, inclusive innovation? What does it entail? What does it require of us to be cognizant of? And, why do we need to understand this?
Thank you for the question. Inclusive innovation is the idea of nothing about us without us. We've heard this several times already. We're going to continue to hear this often again. It is co-designing, it is co-developing, partnering with a community so you can create something that meets their needs, collaborating together over time to create solutions that will continue to meet their needs as their expectations adapt, as the technology evolves. So it's really sort of a humble way of thinking about innovation. You have to realize you don't know everything for everyone. You go slowly, you go carefully, you go in concert with people. And when it comes to people with disabilities, there's so many different types of disabilities, and there's the intersectionality of disabilities. You can't create one product that's perfectly accessible for everyone, so don't make that the goal, but continue to thoughtfully evolve technology with people and for people.
Santi, let's go to Senator Crystal Asega. Could you kindly tell us what role legislation plays in all this, particularly in a bid to ensure that innovations are protected? What role does legislation play? And as you tell us that, also you could also mention how far have we gone with legislation in Kenya and perhaps in Africa, if we are familiar with what's going on elsewhere.
Thank you, Dr. Laguta. So my background is, of course, in disability advocacy. It's in accessibility, and it's also in inclusive transport and mobility. And I've been doing that for several years. I wasn't born with my disability, but once I acquired it later in life, I, of course, started to understand the importance of of having these kinds of things embedded, of course, not just in society, but in law. And then I got a chance to become a senator out of absolutely nowhere. But here I am now basically taking my advocacy from the streets and doing it in Parliament. Now, the importance of legislation is everything, but it's only half of the equation. There's legislation and then there's implementation. I can only speak as a legislator, which means I write the law, but implementation would be for government and for the executive, of course, to come and speak to that. But what I've done so far since being in Senate for 1.5 years or so is, I remember in 2022, Inclusive Africa, we were together and they launched the KEBS ICT standards, right? That happened in 2022. And I was there and I remember understanding the importance of that piece of standard or principle now that it was used, to be used and to be implemented. Now, what I've done since then, Dr. Laiguta, is that I've been able to embed that in my PWD bill, which is the Persons with Disabilities Bill. I have 4 different bills. One of them is the PWD bill, one is the Kenyan Sign Language Bill, the Learners with Disabilities Bill, and the Start-Up Bill. Those are the 4 that I've been able to push unanimously through Senate so far, and I've got 6 more to go. And in the PWD bill, I've been able to embed and anchor the ICT standards that were developed together with many partners who are in this room and at this conference, and KEBS as well. So we at least have one step forward to a more inclusive Kenya in terms of ICT and tech. And it basically mandates any company, whether any organization, institution, public or private sector, to have their ICT products and services, etc., whether they are web-based, non-web-based, or hybrid, to include and to embed the ICT standards within them so that we are moving to a place where if you do not have those standards embedded, if you're a bank, if you are a school, if you are a manufacturing company, then you can have punitive action faced against you because you are leaving out the biggest minority in the country if you do so. So it's been something that's very important to me, not just as a VIP myself, but also now somebody that represents people with disabilities in Parliament. So, yes.
Thank you, Senator. Let's turn back to Shoaib. Shoaib, to what extent has our continent achieved the ideals of inclusive innovation? And
sorry?
perhaps you can give us the South African perspective.
Let me understand the question, whether we've achieved the inclusion ideals.
Yes, the ideals. To what extent have we been able to achieve the inclusive, the ideals of inclusive innovation?
Yeah. I doubt, I've not come across a country that can say it is completely inclusive, whether it's in terms of innovation or education or transportation. I think it's an ideal that we're still striving towards, very much so. But success has been unequal. If I look at the African continent, for instance, I would say there's advances being made in Rwanda, Kenya, Uganda, and then, of course, you asked me about South Africa. Then, yes, there's been significant progress made in South Africa, but I wouldn't say it's ideal. I think they have a very long way to go.
Thank you. Perhaps you could add on and tell us what stands in the way of inclusive innovation in your experience. What is it that are the challenges, the stumbling blocks?
Yeah, okay. So I think if I look at the South African experience, I would say that if you look at the initial period where the most legislation and policy advances were made in terms of inclusion for people with disabilities, it was a period, the initial period from 1994 until 2005, 6, 7. And I think that initial time was immediately when President Nelson Mandela became the president of the country. It was a free South Africa. It was a spring, sort of political spring, where the government was open to new legislation and diversity and inclusion. And then I think one of the main reasons that stands in the way, and I have to emphasize this very clearly, is there's very little pressure on the government to become more inclusive. Now, initially, let me make this point very clear, that at the time when the government was open in this political spring, you also had a very, very strong disability rights movement in the country. So there was a lot of civil society pressure on the government. There was a lot of awareness raising around the rights of people with disabilities. But now that that has waned off, there's less pressure on the government and less pressure on the private sector and society in general to advance the rights of people with disabilities and new innovation in technology. But I would say largely there's awareness of innovation and accessibility and accessibility.
Thank you, Shoaib. Chris, perhaps your continent has taken greater strides than just about everyone else, but how have you been able to accommodate and scale these challenges? How have you met these challenges in your experience?
So right now in the EU, we're looking at this legislation called the European Accessibility Act. And this is it is a directive that is put up forth by Brussels and is being harmonized and transposed with each of the different countries. The interesting thing is each of these different countries are doing it slightly differently. They'll take 85% of the legislation or 90% and add some small things from place to place. So it's creating a bit of a confusion for companies who want to be able to do the right thing. So as we look towards building standards, we need to understand the balance of consistency, but also identifying those areas where you have to make a change because it's important for your people. But you don't want to necessarily vary from, say, this EN 301-549 standard, and I'm sorry for the acronym, this is what it's called. You don't want to vary from that for no reason, because it makes it more difficult for companies to create thoughtful products for you. But where it makes sense, say for a wheelchair built in Norway won't survive in Africa. It wasn't designed with those needs. So don't take their specification. You might want to take part of it and then make the changes necessary. But looking at digital technology, if you're sitting in an office, you're sitting in an office, you're sitting in an office, those changes don't need to be quite as intense. So understand the needs of your people, understand the advantages of the specifications, and make the changes thoughtfully.
Great. Senator, I'm sure we all agree and recognize the fact that legislation and setting standards and administrative structures that we set may not really suffice. What else needs to be done to overcome the challenges we come across in innovation, in accessibility, and all that comes with accessibility?
Yes, certainly it doesn't suffice. It's only one piece of the puzzle. I think we need more inclusion champions in the non-disabled space. So as much as all of us are here and we all have something to discuss or contribute to this conversation, the people who need to hear it are outside. People who need to hear it are on matatus right now, they're in their jobs, they're in their schools, etc. They're the ones that need to hear it. And the only way that they're going to hear it is if we have voices that are loud enough in different spaces of influence that they can continue talking on behalf of us about the inclusion sort of journey and the importance of having a universally designed Kenya or Africa. And without these loud voices, meaning in my context, for example, your local senator, your area MP, your area MCA, if we don't talk about it, or if the general public, the wider public who are non-disabled don't talk about these things to them, so they can see like, oh wow, my constituents really think that this is very important, and if I want them to vote me back in 2027, then I also have to make it a priority. I also think that companies need to include or be more inclusive on the board level and above, because once the captain of the ship or the driver of the car says, as a board member or as the chair of this board, inclusion is important and this is why, then everyone beneath, it'll trickle down to them, and it'll just become a standard within the company, rather than just having one or two people believe in this thing and try to convince everybody else. It will actually come from the top, and it will enter policy, and it'll make its way in culture and so on and so forth in that environment. So I think that there's a lot to be done in terms of the non-disabled coming on board with us and saying, okay, we hear you, we've been hearing you, and how can I also help? It also means media need to change narrative around disability. It's not just the story of inspiration, like, oh wow, you really make me feel like my life can be so much worse, so I should appreciate my life. That's not nice. It's like, I'm not supposed to be here to be your inspiration. I'm supposed to be here to be at an equal playing field with you, so that I can show you that I can do what you can do, so long as you give me the things that I need and remove barriers from achieving that. So I think that there's a lot to be done. Thank you, yeah. And a good example of this, Dr. Laguta, as I conclude, is I am the only and I'm the first visually impaired senator in Kenya's history.
Wonderful.
And thanks. And it's not because there are not other fabulous and brilliant VIPs in Kenya, but it's only because we've not been given the tools and the access and the meaningful sort of like participation ability so that we can do this work, right? And so as I'm here, even if I just only make it one term and nobody wants me back, it's cool. So long as in these 5 years of this term, I have shown and I have done things to move the needle and to change the narrative around disability. And VIP, which I am the original, I'm the OG of that saying, by the way. I used to live in the UK, and in the tube, they used to call me a VIP when I came into the tube to go from one place to the next. And I asked them, what does VIP mean? And they said, visually impaired passenger. So when I came back to Kenya after working and living in the UK, I was like, I call myself a VIP instead of calling myself a VI, because I felt like that sounded like a robot, like someone from the Transformers movie, like a VI. So I was like, I want to be called a VIP. And from there, I think that has empowered many other people, visually impaired persons, who have seen my story, to take that on board and themselves and call themselves VIPs. And that's an example of how best practice, how when a solution is made or given to a visually impaired person, a PWD, actually everyone else can also use it and be empowered by it and advance their lives through it. So very important for the wider general public to be involved in these conversations.
Thanks, Mheshimiwa. Back to Abdel. Abdel, whose business is it to drive this agenda and give us the Egyptian perspective, the lessons we can learn from your territory?
Okay, so if you can put my slides back on. Actually, I have answered in my slides a little bit. So actually, I do agree that just sticking to standards about this comment, standards can regulate, the general framework, but there will be differences. This is why we said best practices also as well. So if we are talking about just the panel before us, and we talk about, e-books or, EPUB format, I guess. So this is like started with the DAISY consortium, if you wish. But whatever you put in these digital accessible books, this is another story too as well. So there needs to be some sort of local best practice that goes around. And you can actually use technology to generate this content. For example, you have immersive, you have the XR environments right now where you can use immersive environment to generate more accessible education as well. So in Egypt, for example, we were talking about law. Yes, we did have in 2018 Law 10 for the rights of people with disabilities, and this was really a quantum leap. This is similar to the American Disability Act, if you wish. You have to work really in integration among all entities. But if you go again to the report on assistive technologies, so you have to, and if you look at the assistive technology gap analysis, there is also a huge gap in availability and affordability as well. Because, okay, you're going to teach accessibility, but the people need to have these tools in their hands at an affordable and affordable prices. So you really need to stimulate and support the whole R&D system as well as the entrepreneurial system. Maybe in more advanced countries, if you wish to or more established regions, if you go in Europe or in the US, you have very well established research entities, very big companies. Maybe in Africa, if I may say, the ecosystem might not be as well equipped as that. So one point of view, as we saw, is to create one entity as NAID in collaboration with other stakeholders from the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, where you can institute a one-stop shop to enable innovators, developers to come to this place from all universities, from the research centers and things like that, to kind of develop their own local products and put an added value to it, because the financial part is another aspect to it as well. And actually, this is actually a video. There are actually multiple examples that are happening in Egypt right now. This is an example of a technology park at the MCIT. NAID is part of that, and you can see here where we're trying to drive innovation for things to move forward. So I'm just trying to be very quick because of time, I know. So
we are past, we're really past, but thanks very much. Chris, should we attach the principle of intellectual property in these innovations that are inclusive and just for that we are able to reach those in need?
1 minute to go.
What a question with 1 minute to go. I think much of the ideas and concepts exist in the public. You look at platforms like Android, much of Android is public. Much of Chrome is public, and these are just two examples of platforms that are thoughtfully designed to support people with disabilities. You have many companies competing and providing free technologies to support the community with different kinds of disabilities. There needs to be a balance between openness and innovation. You want to empower a startup to be able to make a viable business supporting people, but you also need to make sure that these technologies are affordable enough to be able to meet the needs of everybody. So I'm frankly not smart enough to know whether all of this needs to be free or not, but I think what we need to do is we need to empower startups to support the community through technology. We need to make it easy and simple to do the right thing for the people, but also make it worthwhile.
Thank you, Chris. Is the minute over? Now we have 5 minutes to the last minute. But that's with a light touch. Thanks very much. Let's give a big applause to the
Dr. Laguta.
Yeah.
Dr. Laguta,
Yes.
if I could just, within 3 seconds,
Yes.
I'm just requesting, because I'll need to leave very quickly. I won't be able to stay with you all for lunch and network. However, I do have 3 young girls that I'm with. They are 3 kids that I take care of. Marion, Yvonne, and Jane, and they are deafblind. They have Usher syndrome, all 3 of them. They're 3 sisters, 12, 10, and 8, and they're in the room. And if there are any discussions being had about deafblind, technologies for deafblind, I would really love for someone to approach their caregivers, Beryl or Gideon, who are here with them, so that, because I'm leaving and I won't be able to get that information, so I hope that anyone who can assist our 3 girls can also talk to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We hear you. So thanks so much. We had a great deal more to share with you, but for these, restrictions on time. So Santani Sana, that brings us to the end of this panel discussion. We've heard very clearly that there is a lot cut out for us to do. It is not an easy task. It requires all to come together and ensure that which cannot be generated to ensure inclusion in a more affordable manner. We all join hands to ensure that our resources are pooled to achieve the best that we can. I'm sure there's a lot more we'll learn in this conference to enhance our discussion. So thanks very much, and a clap for me.